Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the president of DHS Pride. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the first in a series of DHS speaker guests. And today, I'd like to welcome our first DHS Pride speaker. With us, we're pleased to have former Utah State Senator Derek Kitchen, who will be with us for the hour to discuss the fight for marriage equality. Derek is a trailblazer and a champion for equality, and we are pleased to have Derek with us as we celebrate LGBTQ History Month. In 2014, Kitchen and his partner sued the state of Utah for marriage equality with Kitchen versus Herber. This case legalized same sex marriage in Utah and five other states in the Western United States, establishing a groundbreaking case law that led to nationwide marriage equality in 2015. For background, Derek served in the Utah State Senate from January 2019 to December 2022. He represented Utah's 2nd District and was formerly a council member on the Salt Lake City Council, representing Council District 4. While in office, he was the only gay member of the state legislature. Currently, Derek serves as Senior Vice President of Congressional Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Export-Import Bank after being appointed by President Biden in 2023. He is a local entrepreneur in the restaurant business, and his restaurant was featured on a television reality show. Let me introduce our DHS Pride members in attendance, including myself as president of DHS Pride, Joanna Hoskins, vice president, Aaron Westphalen, secretary, Slava Bortnik, communications lead, Joseph Rucker, law enforcement liaison. So with that, I'd like to go to our first question for Derek. Derek, since this is LGBTQ History Month, why do you think this month is important and that we recognize our history to include National Coming Out Day? In doing so, can you talk about your own experience of coming out and what our LGBTQIA plus History Month means to you?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Paul. And before I start, I just want to say thank you for organizing this. And thanks to everybody for tuning in and participating in your affinity group at DHS. I'm really proud to be here with you. So I would say that this month is really important to me personally, primarily just because it's an opportunity to um, amplify our history as a community. I think LGBTQ History Month is important to acknowledge the struggles of our community, but also the achievements of the LGBTQ community at large. I think this month presents, we have National Coming Out Day on October 11th, of course. It's a month before the election, so it's an opportunity for us to organize and stay engaged on the political issues that matter to our community more broadly. But I think with this month occurring every year, it promotes understanding and inclusivity within our society. And then, in regards to your a group here at DHS, I think this is also an opportunity to organize in the workplace. And with that, we can share our stories, we can build community, we can amplify the concerns that we have with our employer or our communities, and we can generally, build capacity among each other. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for us and something that really matters a lot to me and a lot of other LGBTQ people that I'm close with. What I'd like to say about my own experience is that, of course, there have been many challenges over the last, 20 years as I've been out of the closet, but there have also been a fair amount of triumphs as well, all of which have had a really important impact in shaping who I am and creating the experience that I've had in this life so far. And I think through all of these triumphs and the challenges and the hurdles that I've faced in my personal life and in my professional development, all of them have reaffirmed my commitment to advocacy and to using my voice to speak up and to stay strong as an individual. As you mentioned, Paul, I'm from Utah, originally from Salt Lake City. That's where I grew up. And I went to University of Utah. I've spent my whole life so far in Salt Lake City. And so, I would say that coming out in the early aughts, 2004, 2005, it was not the easiest time for a gay kid in, Utah. As you may know, there's a very large, predominantly Mormon community in Utah. And historically speaking, they haven't been terribly friendly to the LGBTQ community. Now, side note, that is changing pretty rapidly, and we can get into that at some point if you'd like. But in terms of my own story, in terms of coming out, I was certainly alone. In 2008, it was the first time I had the opportunity to cast a vote in a presidential election. This was a really exciting time for me because I was able to support Barack Obama and a number of local candidates that were really exciting and energizing for me. Uh, but I also have to admit that it was a bit of a bittersweet election because that was the same year that California voters passed Proposition 8 in California. And for those of you who may not recall Proposition 8, this was the voter initiative that overturned marriage equality in California. And so it was a bittersweet moment, primarily because we had just elected Barack Obama, but we also lost marriage equality in California. And so that was a moment for me, I remember in my early development, politically speaking, at least, where I realized that, one success sometimes feels like the end all be all. But it's in reality, political victories and acceptance more broadly in the community, it's an iterative process. And it's something that we need to stay focused on over the long haul. So even when we have victory on one front, we got to stay focused more broadly as well. And so, coming out in Utah, where I was the only LGBTQ person that I knew growing up, I came out when I was 15. I'm the oldest of all of my siblings, and my father is not around, so it's just my mom and my two brothers and myself. And I found myself regularly in the role of household leadership. Whether my mom was off to work or busy doing other matters, I found myself in a role of leading my brothers and tending to the important chores and matters around the house. And I think as I came out of the closet, it became clear that for me, I had to identify with myself first and foremost. But once I had made peace with myself as a young gay person, um, it was really obvious to me that while my family was unfamiliar with what it meant to be gay, that it was up to me to bring them along with me for the journey. And so, what I had found is that through demonstrating strength and being clear about who I am, it made for a very swift transition with my immediate family. And then once they were on board and understood who I was and knew that it was not a fad, it was nothing that I was going to change. Once that was obvious, they wanted to keep me around in their life and as an operating member of the family. And so, I think a real early lesson for me was just to be comfortable with myself. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but I think, if you look at where we're at today, we've come a long way in the last 20 years. And so I think so many of us have similar stories of resilience and strength and coming to terms with ourselves to the point where we can move mountains when we know what we want to accomplish. And so I think, that's a real early lesson for me as an openly gay person in the state of Utah. And then, of course, tying that just briefly back to LGBTQ History Month, I think back to the Mattachine Society in the 50s and how this was not a safe time to be vocal and out, but people did. They took the initiative and they took the risk and they ran with it. I think about all of the primarily gay men in the 80s that were forced to organize to keep each other alive and to make sure that they had medications and that they were taken care of in the hospital. And I think that that sort of sense of strength. Obviously it's a challenge and a sort of a dark side of our history, but these moments in time have produced, I believe, a community that's not only tight knit but really focused on the future and of insisting on inclusion. And so, really proud to celebrate LGBTQ History Month this year.
And Derek, we're so glad to have you here and for you to tell your story because, as you noted, being able to be a model for others or an inspiration, the courage that you took to come out at such an early age, at age 15, and then to we'll get a little bit more into it, to be a champion of equality later. That is modeling behavior that you didn't even realize, and in doing so, you gave so much comfort to others to make them look at themselves and say, "Hey, he did it, so I can do it as well." So, for you to come here and tell this story, especially during this month, we appreciate that very much, and we're going to talk more. But I appreciate you being here and being able to do this because I think it's going to mean so much to others, and also it's important for those young folks today to understand the past and understand the history, especially the topic of today, marriage equality as well, and understand what it took to get to this place. As you noted, there's been a lot of progress over the last 20 years, but there's so much more to be done, and we'll talk about that as well. But for our next question, can you tell me a little bit more about your effort with Kitchen versus Herbert? Talk about why marriage equality is so important, who was involved in your effort, and what was it like, including the good and the bad.
Sure. Um, well, I already mentioned a little bit about Proposition 8, and why that was so important for me is because coming from Utah, the Mormon Church uh, essentially bankrolled that political effort in California. You know, they sent money to the initiative. They sent their members down there to knock on doors and to canvass and to persuade voters to roll back access to marriage equality in 2008. And that was the playbook for the rest of the country as the world, you know, in 2008 was beginning to change and become more accepting of LGBTQ people. And so that was a real motivator for me. And so, you know, you keep in mind, you know, the case that I filed initially was launched in 2013. It hit the courts in 2014, but in early 2013, the Windsor case had not yet been argued before the United States Supreme Court. And so I remember, you know, working with my partner and our legal counsel to decide, you know, exactly what is the argument we're going to piece together and try to pull together the strategy. There were a lot of people in Utah that were not only uncomfortable with us suing the governor and the attorney general in federal court, but were uncomfortable with the idea that Utah might get out ahead of its skis, so to speak, on the legal front. There were a lot of concerns from you know, folks that monitor, you know, the legal landscape and are actively trying to move the needle through the judicial process, that saw Utah as one of those places that would probably be the last place on earth where marriage equality would occur, right? Certainly in Massachusetts, certainly in California, and you know, Colorado, for example, and other, you know, blue purple states. But Utah, come on, like, that ain't going to happen, right? So we were faced early on with a lot of hesitation, skepticism, and a lot of pushback from people that I respect, who were nervous that if we moved too quickly with a lawsuit in Utah, that we risked actually securing bad case law, federal case law. So there was a worry that a federal judge in Utah would rule in such a way that it would actually set back the movement. And so, you know, there were a lot of concerns on that front, and they were concerns that I took to heart, by the way. Um, I will say that as you know, I engaged with, you know, my legal counsel and some advisors that I leaned on for a lot of guidance and direction. That we were confident that we were on the right path, not only because we felt the political winds shifting in our favor, but the strategy for us was getting out there in a red state, and not only you know, beginning to change hearts and minds, but to craft a legal strategy that could withstand the scrutiny of a conservative justice, right? And so when it was finally launched we filed our case in March 2013. I'll never forget. It was the day it was pouring rain, and my attorney picked us up in her car. It was a little two-door, you know, red Mazda. It was like an incredible day because that little two-seater is forever burned into the back of my mind. But we made it down to the clerk's office. We applied for a marriage license, were swiftly denied a marriage license, and then went back to the office of my attorney, and we filed our federal complaint. Um, so it took a while for the case to make its way through the courts, but keep in mind, in June of 2013 is when the Supreme Court decided on Windsor. And so we quickly amended our initial complaint to include Windsor as precedent, as case law. So we used a lot of the arguments that were cited in the Windsor decision to boost our argument for marriage equality. And so when we finally ended up arguing in front of the federal judge, it was an amazing day. I'll never forget the news media, flooding the courtroom and just sort of all this attention. And keep in mind, I'm just a young 24-year-old punk who thinks he can sue the state and win, right? And it was a little bit of an overwhelming moment, but I'll never forget the experience by and large, the pushback that we received, and then more importantly, the taste of victory when Utah became the first state in the country to legalize same-sex marriage through the federal courts. Now, when our case was initially decided, it was only applicable to Utah. And of course, the state of Utah appealed the case to the circuit court, which is in Denver. And so we argued on appeal in April of 2014 and ended up prevailing in that appeal. All three of the court judges ruled on this one, and we ended up prevailing. And then the state of Utah appealed once again for the final time to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the justices declined to take up consideration of our case. Which ended up being a really good thing because it punted to the lower level court, the circuit court. And when it was all said and done, we ended up legalizing same-sex marriage for 5 states. And so, you know, this is again a moment in time when you had a patchwork of legal cases popping up all over the country. And so I noticed that, a number of the other cases that were sort of waiting in the wings, they also went back and amended their legal complaint to include the precedent that we had created in Utah. And so, I think it was a bit of a risk to file such a big case in a red state, but because we prevailed in a red state, it ended up making our arguments that much stronger. So, the key players in this, as you asked, obviously, the plaintiff, myself and my co-plaintiffs. We had another lesbian couple along with us, and so we could tell our stories individually and sort of demonstrate just quite how diverse our community is and how marriage equality for the LGBTQ community is broad-reaching and impacts families of all shapes and sizes. Obviously, the legal counsel, our attorneys, but keep in mind, we had to also get the community on board as well. And so there was a big effort to get out there and, build community support for same-sex marriage. And I found that it was easier when you were able to share a personal story and to put a face to when you say same-sex marriage, it's sort of, opaque and so, somebody down the street who I've never met. But when it's Derek Kitchen and his partner and his family trying to achieve equality, right? When it's, Cody and Lori, the lesbian couple that are retired school teachers, and one of them is disabled, and you have Social Security benefits, and end of life planning at play, right? All of these stories become, I think, real powerful motivators for people to begin to question their assumptions and to change their mind, because it's not easy to get people to change their mind when they've already been committed to a worldview or a political belief. But when you can put a personality to a story, it makes all the difference. And so, we had a lot of ups and downs in this journey, a lot of waiting. You file your case and then you wait for 9 months, and then it's decided, and then it's appealed, and you wait for 5 months. And so, the emotional journey was up and down, but it was certainly one for the books, and really proud to have played a bit of a role in moving the needle for same-sex marriage, not only in Utah and the West, but the Supreme Court. If you look at the Obergefell decision, which ultimately legalized same-sex marriage for the whole country in 2015, many of those stories are reflected in that legal case, in that argument. And I would say Jim Obergefell ended up becoming a dear friend of mine, and many of us, I'm sure many of you know who he is and have met him. And I just think that this case, while it was unfortunate that we had to go to the mat to fight for ourselves and fight for our rights, I'm so proud that we were able to do that. And in no other country but the United States is this viable, right? And so, really proud.
Yeah, and we're very proud for you and your efforts to do this because you're really a champion for many of us, including on this line here today. My husband and I got married in 2022, and if it wasn't for folks like you who came before us as champions for marriage equality, I don't know if we would have gotten to the place we are today. So appreciate your courage and your efforts and time and energy to get through all of that because like you said it yourself, there are emotional up and downs, and telling your story probably doesn't fully capture the emotions involved, but I can't imagine what that was like in that time. I know what it was like for someone who couldn't get married at that time, like all of us, like being with a partner and not being able to get married, but you all had the courage to and be in the time and place and circumstance to be able to advocate and create change. So thank you for that. Really appreciate that personally, and I know so many others in the community um, appreciate that as well. But with that, I'm going to go over to Joanna for our next question.
Hello, as stated before, I'm Joanna Hoskins, and besides being the vice president of DHS Pride, I'm also the founder and lead of our gender expansive working group. So, with that in mind, my question essentially is looking back on all of your experiences with the litigation and legislation surrounding marriage equality, how can we apply some of your lessons to the fight that we have for transgender? Non-binary and gender non-conforming equality today?
Wow, that's such an important question, and thank you so much for bringing this one forward. I'm a gay man. I'm a cisgender gay man, and so I think the experience that I have in the world is certainly more privileged and very different from somebody who's uh, transgender or non-binary. And so I think there are certainly lessons to be drawn from the marriage equality movement, but it's separate and different, right? So it's similar but different. And I think, we should really focus on trying to draw those lessons out of the marriage equality movement over the last 15 years or so, but also the trans community has different stories to share, and I think that the personal narrative, the willingness of the trans community to not only make themselves visible but to get out there and to tell their story and to share the intimate bits of their lives with their close community and their realm of influence, whether that's at work or at church or at school or what have you. That's really critical, and I think that that's a lesson that we can all learn from marriage equality movement was the power of the personal narrative to change hearts and minds and to illustrate the importance of full and unquestioned inclusion in our society. And so I think it's important to connect the experiences, but it's also important to acknowledge that there's certainly differences that make it more challenging in some ways, and also, I think worthwhile to have its own arc, its own narrative, its own story, right? And so I think, you know, we should be empowered by the progress over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years on marriage equality. Because keep in mind, like I said, I brought forward the Prop 8 and the Mormon element earlier. The Mormon community was certainly not in favor of gay marriage 10, 15 years ago. It's not that they're incredibly vocal about their support these days, but they have softened their firm stance and are really focused these days on not fighting marriage equality and fighting our community, but instead figuring out creative ways to bring young LGBTQ kids into the fold. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a higher youth and teen suicide rate among trans kids, right? And so we want to keep our young ones alive, and more than just keeping them alive. We want them to do well and to thrive and to be contributing members of our society and our communities. And so I think that we all have a role to play. And so part of that again is being vocal, speaking up, telling our stories. And then I think, when it comes to, legal victories, I see legislatures all over the country enacting really challenging new guidelines and frameworks that are targeting the trans community. We are again seeing a patchwork in this country where you have some states that are affirming the trans community and others that are actively trying to restrict their access to society and full inclusion. And so we have a lot of work to do. Um, Final quick thought on this. Um, with the marriage movement, finding allies was, I think, the secret weapon. And so for the trans community in particular, just trans and non-binary community, it's not only making yourself visible, but it's getting out there and actively cultivating allies. And you'll be surprised there are a lot of non-conventional allies out there. And so I think the more of those that we have, the better.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned telling your stories. That's a point that I've come back to several times over the past few years when I've been on panels and interviews and such. And I very much agree with you. My stance has always been that the more we are able to tell our stories, the more we are able to influence the people around us and gain their respect in new ways. So moving on then, my next question would be, what advice do you have for those of us who are out here fighting for equality?
Mm. I always struggle with the advice question because it's such an individual thing. But I think in a broad sense, if you see yourself as an activist or somebody who is looking to help move the needle on this issue, whether it's gender issues or climate change or something non-related to the LGBTQ community, you got to look for cracks in the ordinary. I think change happens in really unexpected places, and I think my case is a good example of that. We were encouraged not to file the case because of the way Utah looked on paper, right? Very traditional conservative state, but we ended up being the first, right? And so I think when it comes to making change, getting stuck in traditional thinking about how change is made is sometimes the Achilles heel to actually getting it done. And so I think, look for cracks in, like I said, the ordinary. Look for creative ways that you can, dare I say, cause a little bit of chatter or disruption in the system, right? I mean, obviously we don't want to be breaking any rules, but in my case, we took the law into our own hands, right, and used the judicial system to make a complaint, to raise an issue. And so I think it's important that we take advantage of those moments and not shy away from kind of broadening the aperture of what we imagine is possible. And even if that means you're the first mover, you got to have faith that others will join you along the way. And I think that that's also an indication of leadership too, right? Leaders need to be willing to stand alone. And so I think, again, look for those opportunities that are unexpected and be willing to stand out on your own. You've got to be strong. It's easier said than done at times, but you got to draw that strength from deep within, and be willing to work hard and make yourself visible, and remain steadfast and resilient and use your story to change hearts and minds. It's doable.
Well, thank you. That's outstanding. And I hope that everybody out there is going to find their own way to do just that. You don't gain any new rights by being still. You have to push a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to Aaron Westphalen, our secretary, who will give you our next question.
So, Derek, while Aaron is bringing up their audio, uh, can I ask a quick question? Is there anything looking back that you would have done differently or you would have liked to have changed?
Oh man, that's a dangerous question, Paul. I think on the marriage equality front, no major changes I would have done differently. I think, you know, I was successful. I was victorious in my effort there. So it, it's it's hard to say you would do anything differently when you were victorious, right? Obviously we learn through our experiences, and I certainly took notes. But I wouldn't imagine changing my approach because I was successful. That being said, I'm a politician. I've spent 8 years in public office. After the case came to an end, I joined the city council, as you mentioned in the intro, and then became a state senator in Utah. And I looked through my legislative record, and man, I'm like, all right, I was successful here and here, and I failed miserably on these three issues, right? So what can I do differently? And I have a laundry list of things that I woulda, coulda, shoulda done in the political space. And I think that's the beauty of this, right? But at the end of the day, I think in making change outside of the lawsuit itself, building a bigger coalition is always the challenge. And again, hunting for allies. I already alluded to the fact that that's key to success. And I said it's easier. There are more of them than we realize, but it's also a challenge to go cultivate the allyship, right? And so, I think there are certainly opportunities in my past where I could have done better at creating a bigger team on a certain issue. But by and large, other than taking notes, I'm proud of the work on the marriage equality front.
You brought up the issue of cultivating allies, but I would also say just membership within, because we're on an employee association program here. One of the challenges, at least in DHS, because we're a very operational, mission oriented environment, is the challenge to keep an active membership.
Yeah.
We have a lot of folks who want to join, participate. They say, well, how can I be involved? How can I do this? But a lot of times they're prohibited, not intentionally, but just time wise from doing things because they have to do their core mission. And so it's a challenge. Even within leadership of the various chapters we have, having the ability to sustain those chapters and keep them going. We have 9 chapters right now, and to keep those 9 chapters alive, so to speak, and our board ourselves, all of us have to dedicate time and energy, and we're trying to do that while competing with our day jobs.
Mm.
So definitely uh, cultivating and sustaining the effort or the movement is difficult, and that's one of the things that we work on every single day. And there was one other thing that I thought of when asking the question, looking back from for me personally, if I could just throw it out, is sometimes I think about what I didn't know at the very beginning, and not maybe even fully understanding all the sub communities that exist under the LGBTQI
Mm.
umbrella. So oftentimes we today, as a leadership team, even amongst this board, are trying to make sure that we're educating ourselves and all the members of our community or sub communities, and how could we do things in the best way possible? Maybe like something we did a year ago or 2 years ago, we would do differently today. So that's one of the things that we think about when we go back as an association. Is are we serving our community effectively, and are we bringing the membership together as much as we can to create that safe space and that safe um, create that atmosphere of belonging, and that's one of our goals as an association here. Even just doing this speaker series today, learning that I had a conversation earlier today talking about you coming on and doing this as a recorded version versus say a lunch and learn hour where if somebody couldn't attend that 1 hour, then they've missed it. And now we'll have an opportunity to share with our membership, and everybody can be able to hear your story in a way and understand the past as well as have maybe that safe place to go forward in the future. So, my next question is, what do you see as the greatest threat to equality for members of the community today? what must today's champions do to overcome the challenges for success? And I know you addressed the championship advocacy piece a little bit. So, what do you see as today's greatest challenges and threats?
Well, in preparing for this conversation, I was going to speak to something else, but with your previous comment just now, Paul, it sparked a new thought for me, which is the challenge with associations these days. Yes, we're all very busy and we have families and other matters drawing our attention, but it's hard to get members of a community to march together, so to speak, right? To gather and to organize. In fact, there's a whole field within political science focused on this, right? You think about, de Tocqueville, 150 years ago, surveying the American landscape and sort of looking at how beautiful it was that we associate in Rotary clubs and church groups, and we come together to fund hospitals in our communities. And that has certainly changed over the decades. And these days, people aren't coming together anymore. Robert Putnam is a famous political scientist. He has a really interesting book called Bowling Alone. And he sort of uses bowling leagues as the way to identify how, I guess, detached Americans have become from each other, and there's a lot of risk involved with this in terms of losing connection with our community. And so I won't go too far off the weeds there, but it's a really interesting point, and it's a challenge that a lot of communities are facing these days in terms of keeping social cohesion together. And there's a lot of challenges with that. And so I think the LGBTQ community certainly suffers um, from that in a way, and I think that that could be seen as a long-term liability because, I also, this came up with Joanna a moment ago, but we are a broad umbrella group, right? We've got lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, gender nonconforming, asexual. We have alphabet soup in our, this acronym, right? So how do we stay together when we've achieved something so significant like marriage equality, right? I worry that we start losing support on some of these other issues, that we become sort of divided on trans issues, for example, or gender issues. And so a real challenge for us as a community is sticking together over the long haul, especially as people begin to, I think, make concerted efforts to divide us and to build political power around divisions from within our group. And so I don't know if there's a right answer here, but for me, it's always been, how do you stay focused on the bigger picture? And I think about, our children. I think about what it was like for me to come out as a young person and what kids these days are looking for in order to find acceptance and to find themselves reflected in society and in their communities. And so, I think these threats of, internal divisions and, not staying cohesive, these are concerns that we need to be aware of over the long haul. And so, I don't know how to wrap up that thought other than to say that we've just got to stay together and to keep the youth, I think, at the forefront of our mind.
Yeah, certainly hear you and understand your concern because it's interesting that you bring that up because that is something within my social circles within the community that I do hear folks talking about often is the subdivision or the conflict within the community itself and how do we overcome that and because there's so much opposition against the community we can't become divided ourselves. So if I could go over to Slava, it looks like Aaron, it looks like they had issues with their audio. Oh, Aaron, are you able to come back on now?
Yes, I was able to find the what I needed and was having some technical difficulties at the same time. So
No worries. Go
yes.
ahead.
So regarding like the workplace as a whole, what are some best practices for a workplace that values diversity, equality, and inclusion?
Well, I should look to you for some guidance on this because you seem to be doing really well with organizing your organization, your institution. And we know the federal government is such a large operation at large. So we have all of these agencies, and some are doing more than others in terms of organizing. So I just want to use this opportunity to applaud all of you for staying active and organized. And I think, as a political operator by training, organizing is key. And again, it's sometimes easier said than done, but nothing changes on its own. So you've got to stay organized, you got to stay visible, you got to stay focused on keeping an expansive mindset with the group. It's not only an LGBTQ community, but we've also got to be speaking to our allies and even people who are on the opposite side as much as possible, so we can understand where they're coming from and create space for them to understand where we're coming from, and hopefully reduce the temperature, especially among hot button, social issues. But I do, again, I've mentioned this already a few times, but I fundamentally believe that allies are key to our long-term success. And so I think that's one thing, organize. The second thing is, continue to stay active within your group, within your organization, in terms of, recommending policies and procedures to your leadership within DHS that ultimately can promote increase in diversity and inclusion. Obviously, comprehensive non-discrimination policies, continue on with the resource group and affinity group, organization. But I think that there's always opportunity for more. And again, this is a volunteer group, so that's sometimes hard when you're busy. But staying consistent is really important. And then, of course, through your organizing, you inadvertently create safe spaces for people, and I think that's a really important part of this. So emphasizing, the importance of safety and a community where you can express yourself freely, and not be held by the standards of folks from before, right? I mean, we are in a world where we have a very diverse group of, the federal government is a very diverse workforce. And so we need to do whatever we can to create space for people to be the most authentic version of themselves at work. And so I hope that helps. I'm not sure if I hit all the marks on the question, but continue to organize.
So if we want to go over to Shannon for our next question.
Hi, Derek. Thanks a lot for sharing your story. I must say that personally, it has touched me. I can appreciate your journey, as well as your commitment to the community. As Paul mentioned, I'm Shannon, and I'm part of the board, one of the newest members. So I'm eager to be here and just to march forward and also be an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. And I was just wondering, just based upon your experiences and what you've shared with us, in your concern, right, for the unification of the community, as well as meeting with allies and ensuring that we just stay abreast with how we're moving forward and focus. Are you still actively engaged with advocating for the group, for the community itself, and how?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thank you for joining the board. And I think this hits on the previous question and what you were saying earlier, Paul, about organizing the, bringing new voices into the fold, into the leadership circle is really, really important. So thank you, Shannon, for joining and participating, and thanks for the question. I am still involved, of course. I mean, I'm here today, and this is a big part of that, right? But, as a member of, the executive branch, as a political appointee in the administration, I'm maybe a little bit more behind the scenes these days. So much of my identity back in Utah, where I'm from, is, I'm a gay man. It's hard baked into who I am, right? So anytime I do anything visibly in the community, whether it's introduce a piece of legislation on financing for, infrastructure or housing, or I'm working on Medicaid, it's, people know I'm a gay person doing that. So I'm proud that because of my career so far and what I've been able to accomplish, not only through marriage equality, but some other matters, that people know me as a queer leader, as an LGBTQ leader. So I feel like that a lot of the work is already done for me when I step into a room. So I don't have to reintroduce people so much to me as a gay person, because I kind of lead with that, right? And so I see just being out and open in the federal government, in my community, in all the goings on of my day-to-day activities. Being out is a big part of how I see my role these days. But I've officially crossed the path, or crossed the threshold of being a young person into being an old person now, right? So I see it every morning in the mirror. But what I'm focused on these days is really supporting younger people, young professionals in particular. Um, I I have a passion for opening doors for people and making connections. And so one thing I really love to do is to meet a new young person early in their career, somebody in their early 20s, just graduating from college, for example. And if I can bring them into my professional circle at some level, either get them an internship in my office, or meet them for happy hour or coffee, or send them an introductory email to somebody else in their field of interest that I know, and just try to like help people. I mean, I've had a couple mentors. I've also had to chart my own path and do it alone. But when you have somebody that's willing to say, hey, I know so and so that is well connected over here, and they may be helpful to you. If I could just take the time to make an introduction to a young person, it can change the trajectory of their career. And it might be small beans for them, or for me, but it could be huge for them. And so, I think mentorship is something that I'm putting a lot of time and effort into in my professional life. And you know, I try to stay active and engaged. And perhaps one day there will be another opportunity for me to hit a, take a big swing at something. And now that I've had a couple successes, I'm certainly not afraid to charge after something large. But right now, it's mostly in supporting the young people.
And if I could just
Thanks.
say real quick,
Oh,
Shannon, I'm sorry, if I could just bring up for the membership, you mentioned about membership, mentorship, is that DHS Pride recently launched a mentorship program where we're trying to bring people from our community, our DHS Pride community, in connection with new people in the department, from a range of topics, from just questions about DHS to career advice. So that's one thing. The other thing is you've uh, talked about the importance of allies and allyship, and one thing we do in our ally training is for our supervisors in the department. We talk about creating a welcoming environment from day one of a new employee who might be a member of the community, whether it's having a pride flag on display, wearing a lanyard, having a pin on, something that is an indicator from you that you are inclusive of the community as an ally, and how can you help someone feel welcome. So between mentorship, ally behavior, as well as even modeling behavior, being yourself in your role. You talked about you go to work as a queer person in your role, as do all of us. And I think all of us being out and being who we are in our daily uh, duties inspires others, and it's necessary. It's it's being out of the closet and being present that gives that comfort to others. I know personally, I was inspired myself when I joined my current organization, and our leader at the time, who was the undersecretary, was out, and himself, with him and his husband and their two children. And for many of us in the organization, he was an inspiration because he was present, he was there, and was that modeling behavior. But Shannon, back to you. Did you have anything follow on?
no, I did not. I just wanted to thank him for the comment, and to also say that what you're doing is mentorship, or in mentorship, is not small at all. Is huge. That is a big a big gain for us. So we appreciate you for that.
And if I
And
could
I'm
say,
done. So
we can all be mentors too. I mean, we don't
yes,
have to
yes.
formalize this. Look for opportunities with everybody you speak to. And I've also had some really unique opportunities to mentor people who are older than me, right? That have maybe shifted gears and are in a new career. And so I think we should all be looking out for each other. And yeah, mentorship is a big part of this.
Yes, it's a lifestyle, right? It's a lifestyle. So thanks. I appreciate that. I am done with my questions. So let's move on to Joe. Joseph.
Hi, Derek. Thank you so much. My name is Joseph Recker. I am currently the law enforcement liaison for DHS Pride. In this position, I have the immense pleasure of representing our LGBT law enforcement officers and allies at the nation's single largest law enforcement employer. DHS currently has over 80,000 sworn federal law enforcement officers and agents spanning 9 different agencies. So my question for you is, since many people watching this are in the Homeland Security or law enforcement field, how has your either present or past work intersected with supporting our national security and our nation's law enforcement?
It's a good question. Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate you bringing that one forward. And, thanks for your service, and thanks to all of the 80,000 sworn officers for their service. I know that oftentimes the fight for social justice is pitted against certain members of the law enforcement community. And I know that that's just not fair. And so I think this is an important question just to talk about now and always. Just to reduce temperatures and to try to bring some of the more important issues forward around how do we, chart a different course for our community at large. For me, law enforcement, as a city council member, we've had our own police department. So I got acquainted very quickly when I joined local government to the challenges facing not only police officers, but also firefighters and others that work to secure the community. And so, we've had opportunities both at the municipal level and then, of course, when I joined the state Senate to try to cultivate not only allyship, like I keep talking about, but, training with our officers so that when they're in the field, they are trained in a way that helps them understand crisis and how to communicate to, gender non-binary groups or trans groups, trans individuals, and to try to really just make it a net positive interaction. And so that's training that I believe is occurring all over the country, but we need more of it. And so, this stuff matters to myself as an individual, but also I think the community at large. And so I've been working with a number of elected officials since I've left public office. I've been working with a number of elected officials to help them advance, non-discrimination work within each of their municipal and regional police departments. My career is really colored by, again, being a queer person that's visible, but focusing on all the other matters that are important to our quality of life. Affordable housing, Medicaid expansion, things like that. So I think it all really does matter. But now that I'm in the federal government, I think about national security a lot more than I ever have. And if it wasn't mentioned at the beginning, I'm serving over at the Export-Import Bank. And what we do is we finance global trade for the U.S. government and American companies so that, if you produce a product here in the U.S., that you can be competitive on the global stage. And so I think a lot about, competition with not only, friendly competition with our allies, but real competition with our, global adversaries. And so I've been able to really look at my work through the lens of economic diplomacy and national security. Now, EXIM, as it's known, Export-Import Bank, EXIM does not finance arms, or we don't do any military sales, but we do finance dual use products. So we've done drones for border security. We've financed helicopters for a variety of, disaster management and firefighting and things of that nature. What I would say here is that ultimately the work that we do, not only the 80,000 sworn officers, but all of us in the federal government, is, our job is to advance, the mission of the American government. It's about security. And in terms of, national security issues, we're talking supply chains, working toward, competing again, like I said, with some of our adversaries on critical minerals and semiconductors and telecommunications. But I also see this as a huge opportunity to strengthen our economic ties around the world. And so, I see national security as sort of something that all of our work ties into. And, as an visible member of the LGBTQ community, I think that when you're working on national security issues, you're changing the way people think of what it means to be a queer person these days, LGBTQ person. And so I guess I would probably end this by turning the question back to you, which we don't have to answer on this call if you don't like. But I'd be curious to know, what kind of challenges you're up against among some of these sworn officers, and what we as leaders within the broader federal government can be doing to support you. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Absolutely appreciate it. Something I know myself and others within the agency are currently working on, like you mentioned, is increased training education. We work with a very wide, diverse group of people and people visiting our country within DHS. You talk about different law enforcement elements, CBP, Federal Air Marshal Service, Secret Service. We're worldwide, so we work with many different nationalities, many different people from different orientations, gender identities. So, like you mentioned, it's crucial that we're able to train our support personnel and officers to be able to interact with these different various communities. And I think you brought up an awesome point regarding how the financial infrastructure of the United States is also something that could possibly be at risk in terms of either extortion or by enemies, and talking about the financial security in the overall homeland security sense, I think was a really good point as well. So I'm going to transfer it over to Paul, our president of DHS Pride.
Thanks, Joe. And if I could add to that point, one of the things that we look at in my home agency, Office of Intel and Analysis, is always from the national security perspective of threats to our members of our community. And this is a DHS Pride event, but we're talking about national security issues, and you can't not talk about that with talking about the fears of our community. And really, there's two focused fears. There's the threat of to our individuals, and then there's also the fear concern from members of our department when they're transferred or TDY to another place that may not be as LGBTQIA friendly. If it's a married couple and they're transferred to some place that's not as friendly, either legislatively or politically, they fear being able to walk down the street and hold their hands together. They fear, will they get attacked coming out of a bar? So it's a real thing. Even in the political environment, what that might cause. So certainly, as Joe mentioned, those concerns come from a training perspective, an operational perspective, interaction with the community, and then looking at the environment itself. One thing I will say, and Joanna, I know that you would take note of that. For those of us who work in the Intel community, in the past we would have been discharged or fired for being a member of the community. But this year, for the first time, the National Security Council had a Pride event in June, and we were invited to that event. And that was major because it's the first time that National Security Council held a Pride event, and it was at the White House, and we were in a room celebrating the progress that has been made by champions in the community like yourself, but also what work needs to be done. But the fact that that was happening was just kind of a moment of, awe that we are here, but then also realizing there's just so much more to do. And on that note, it's good transition to probably our last topic for the hour. But
Oh,
in the
Paul, if you don't mind for a second, this is a part
Okay.
where I kind of have to insert that
Go ahead.
DHS Pride was a coordinating body for an intelligence product just before Pride Month this past year about engaging LGBT communities with the counterterrorism mission of the United States, in particular with law enforcement, emergency management, emergency services. And that's an unclassified product available to the public.
So, bringing up community, one of the things that we wanted to talk about too within the hour is intersectionality. Big part of diversity, inclusion, and equality relates to the economic circumstances of individuals, privilege, and the ability to succeed and move within our communities. How do you think we can better be at supporting our fellow communities in terms of allyship, even under the LGBTQ umbrella? because it's not always about race or gender. Sometimes it's about economic circumstance, and then it circles back to those two. But what do you think?
Hmm. Man, that's a good question. A tough question, to be honest with you, Paul. But one that I'm glad you brought forward and something we need to be thinking about at all moments. You know, what I'm finding, and I'd be interested to hear if people disagree, but what I'm seeing is that a lot of historically marginalized people are finding ways to collaborate with each other right now, and see that intersectionality is key to long-term success. And we've seen folks politically try to roll back victories that we've had one way or the other. And I really believe that in order for us to cement some of the victories that we've had over the last little while, it's going to require not only the long vision, but a commitment from our allies and other people that maybe not directly impacted by some of the legislation or the policies that our community is. So we've got to be, knitting together a stronger intersectional fabric with each other. At the workplace, and especially in the federal government right now, I'm seeing a lot of women rise to leadership roles that have, for as long as we know, have only been held by men, right? And so, this is the gender thing we were talking about. But, I really am proud to see so many women take on roles that haven't ever been held by men before. And I would say, in my experience, especially at my agency is head up by a Black woman from Georgia, and she has done a really good job of surrounding herself with a very, very diverse group of senior advisors and leaders in the front office. So you have a lot of gay people, not a lot of lesbians, to be honest, but you do have a lot of gay men from all walks of life. You're also seeing a lot of women and people from other corners of the country. I come from Utah, right? In many rooms, I'm oftentimes the only Westerner. Hopefully that changes. But, I think it's really important to elevate people that are first-time graduates, first-generation graduates from college, and folks that are going back to school for during their career. I do see a lot of people of color and LGBTQ folks coming together and quietly or loudly boosting each other. So I think, again, that sense of camaraderie is something that we really need to continue to cultivate within each other. And then, I think I mentioned this just a moment ago, but I would like to see us gay men, speaking to gay men here, I think it's important for gay men to do a better job at supporting lesbian women and trans people, because it's harder oftentimes for them. And we enjoy a fair amount of privilege by being men. And so, there's always an opportunity. We just got to go pull it out. And so I think that that's something that I want other gay men to be aware of, is that we have an obligation and a responsibility to be supporting our brothers and sisters in this work. And so, if we're going to be that big umbrella, then we've got to continue to do the work.
And I appreciate you being explicit on that, because I alluded to that earlier when I was referring to some subdivision. It's when communities are concerned that, as in my case, a white gay male cisgender person, that we, in a place of privilege, we are forgetting about the others in our community. And we don't want that to happen. We want to be allies to everyone in our community. So I appreciate you saying that, because that's really the core of the matter when it comes to intersectionality. And when we talk about all communities, persons of color, to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to be allies and to help support, and to our non-binary and transgender communities as well. But I'd like to go over to Slava. I know Shannon will have her last question for the hour, but Slava, if you can talk about, the focus has been marriage equality and, champions of equity and equality. I know you have a story yourself. If you can talk about that, and if you have a question for Derek.
Derek, thank you very much, first of all, for your inspiring perspectives. It's very engaging, and for everything you have done and continue doing for LGBTQ plus community. And I myself benefited greatly from the work of the generations of American LGBTQ plus activists. Particularly in 2013, when DOMA was struck down, I was able to reunite with my partner of 10 years. So we were in long distance relationship. I'm originally from Belarus. And only because of your efforts, basically, we were able to get reunited, and I was able to apply for a green card and eventually became a naturalized US citizen.
Wow.
So thank you very much for all of that. And also, during these trying times, many of us are very concerned, and me personally, because I'm like a recent immigrant, concerned about what is coming in our way due to the potential change of administration. We don't know what's going to happen, so it's very important to have to hear and see persons like you, very brave and inspiring.
You're sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Shannon, we'll come over to you if you're able to come back up.
Yes, yes, I am. So you heard the story, the good news story and the experience of Slava. So with that being said, and just based upon your past and your present, are you considering running for public office again?
I am hungry to get back in that arena. But I believe politics is a community sport, and especially in the American system, right? So I believe in passing the baton when it makes sense. And, I'm not an elected official anymore, but if it ever makes sense for me, if there's a seat that is just calling my name, or there's an opportunity down the road that makes natural sense, you better believe it. I will not say no. When the universe calls and you've got to like step into it, I'm a natural born champion and fighter in this sense, and so I will certainly take that calling seriously if it comes my way. But I'm a public servant anyway, and so I feel like every day I get to wake up and I go to my office down the street here in downtown Washington, D.C., and I'm living the dream. I get to work on things that I think are bigger picture issues that impact my community, not only my community as a member of the LGBTQ community, but my American community, right? I have an opportunity to serve all people, and I'm so proud to do that from my perch at the Export-Import Bank, and will continue to serve for as long as I'm invited to. So thanks for the question.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks for the service.
So if I could ask our board, does anybody have any last questions or anything they'd like to say to Derek before we close out?
I'd just like to say thank you for paving the way for marriage equality hurdles that we've had in the past so that there can be a future. And also, we are very excited and will watch with bated breath where you end up in the future if you choose to do any additional political or where you end up in your career. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate that.
And Derek, if I could say also, for those of us on the line who are married, the benefit piece that you mentioned is so important. There's members of our DHS Pride community that have intersectionality in many ways, including disabilities, seen and unseen, neurodivergence, and all kinds of other intersecting aspects of our lives that we need benefits, and our spouses have, in the case of we all work for the federal government, many of them are under our federal benefits, and that's possible because of the marriage equality effort and the ability to marry same sex within the federal government, and in particular for our DHS community. So, anyone else have any comments? Okay, well, Derek, on behalf of DHS Pride, our chapters, our entire membership, we thank you so much for being here. Like I said, this was our first DHS speaker series. We hope to continue these in the future so that our membership can benefit to hear the stories from folks like yourselves who've been champions for equality. And thank you so much for joining us during LGBTQ plus History Month.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining and participating. Thanks for organizing. My final word here would be we all have an opportunity every day to make a difference. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big. One of my favorite politicians, Paul Wellstone, used to say, "We all do better when we all do better." So diversity here is our strength, and we're better off when all of us are more stabilized and supported and loved. So thanks for all that you do individually every day to strengthen yourself and the people that you care for. And we're all better off for it. So thanks for having me today. Really appreciate the time. And if anybody wants to chat with me offline, feel free to look me up and send me a note. I'm always available.
Thank you, Derek.